The small restaurant sat quietly on a narrow street that most people passed without noticing. It was the kind of place where the walls held years of stories, and the air always smelled of warm food and old wood. At the far end of the room, near a window that looked out onto the street, stood an old piano. Its surface was scratched, its keys slightly yellow, and most customers thought of it as decoration rather than an instrument. Some didn't even know it still worked. On that afternoon, the restaurant was not busy. A few people sat at scattered tables, talking softly, eating slowly, lost in their own thoughts. The staff moved calmly, used to the slow rhythm of the place. Nothing felt special or different. It was just another ordinary day. Then the door opened, and a man stepped inside. He did not dress loudly. There was nothing flashy about him. His clothes were clean and simple, but they fit him well. He carried himself with quiet confidence, the kind that did not ask for attention. No one recognized him, and no one knew that he was a successful businessman from Japan, someone who had built a life most people only dreamed of. To everyone else, he was just another customer. He paused for a moment after entering, taking in the room. His eyes moved slowly, not judging, not rushing. Then his gaze stopped at the old piano. Something changed in his expression. He walked toward it as if pulled by a memory. The noise of plates and soft conversation faded from his mind. He reached out and touched the piano gently, almost with respect. His fingers rested on the keys, not playing yet, just feeling. The wood was worn, the keys slightly uneven, but to him it felt familiar. Without asking permission, he sat down. A few people looked up, surprised. One of the staff members hesitated, unsure whether to say something. The piano had been there for years, rarely used. Sometimes children pressed random keys for fun, but no adult ever played it seriously. Still, no one stopped him. He took a slow breath. Then he began to play. The first notes were soft and slow. They did not sound like popular music or anything the listeners recognized. The melody moved gently, like someone speaking in a calm voice. Some people kept eating, barely paying attention. Others frowned, confused by the unfamiliar sound. The man's face remained calm, but his eyes were distant. His hands moved with care, pressing the keys as if each note mattered deeply. The music began to grow, not louder, but heavier. It carried emotion, even if the listeners could not name it. A couple at a nearby table whispered to each other. One of them shrugged, clearly unimpressed. Another customer shook their head slightly, as if the music was out of place. To them, it felt strange. The melody did not follow patterns they knew. It didn't rise and fall the way they expected. It didn't invite clapping or smiling. Instead, it felt personal, almost private, like reading someone's diary without understanding the language. The man continued playing. Inside him, memories surfaced. Long nights of work, quiet mornings filled with pressure, moments of failure, moments of success, and moments of loneliness that money never fixed. The piano was not entertainment for him. It was a way to speak without words. But the room did not hear that. One person let out a small laugh, not out of cruelty, but discomfort. Another checked their phone. A server glanced toward the piano, then looked away, feeling unsure. Was this allowed? Was the man showing off? Was this some kind of strange act? The music grew more complex. His fingers moved faster now, with more strength. The notes carried tension, then release, then tension again. His shoulders tightened slightly. He leaned closer to the piano, completely absorbed. Still, the reaction stayed cold. Some listeners felt bored. Others felt confused. A few felt irritated. To them, it sounded like someone playing without a clear goal. They could not hear the story hidden inside the sound. The man did not look at the audience. He did not seek approval. He was not performing for applause. He was playing because something inside him needed to be expressed, even if no one understood. In the kitchen area, a young waitress paused while pouring water into a glass. She froze for a moment, listening. Her head tilted slightly. To her, the music did not sound random. It sounded careful, intentional, emotional, but she did not move yet. The man's hands slowed again. The melody softened, like the end of a long thought. A quiet sadness filled the final notes, hanging in the air after the sound faded. Silence followed. No one clapped. A few people exchanged looks. One customer cleared their throat. The restaurant returned to its normal noise, as if nothing meaningful had happened. The man remained seated for a moment, his hands resting on the keys. His expression showed no disappointment, only acceptance. He stood up slowly and stepped away from the piano. To everyone else, it was just a strange moment. Something unusual, quickly forgotten. But for him, the story had only begun. The man returned to his table and sat quietly, as if nothing unusual had happened. He did not look around to see who noticed him. He did not wait for a reaction. He simply picked up the menu, though he barely looked at it. His mind was still with the piano, with the notes that had just left his hands. Around him, life continued as normal. Plates clinked. A chair scraped softly against the floor. Someone laughed at a private joke. The strange moment faded quickly for most people, turning into nothing more than a short interruption in their day. But not everyone forgot so easily. A few customers glanced toward the piano again, trying to make sense of what they had heard. One person shook their head and whispered that the music felt odd and uncomfortable. Another said it sounded sad for no reason. No one spoke loudly enough for the man to hear, but the feeling of confusion stayed in the air. The staff gathered near the counter for a moment. One worker leaned in and quietly asked if the man should have been stopped. Another shrugged and said it was harmless. The piano had been sitting there unused for years anyway. They agreed to let it go and moved on with their tasks. The man finally ordered a simple meal. When the food arrived, he thanked the server politely and ate slowly. His movements were calm, almost careful, like someone who had learned patience over a long life. If anyone had looked closely, they might have noticed the tiredness behind his eyes. Not the tiredness of a long day, but the kind that comes from carrying many memories alone. Outside, the light began to change. Afternoon slowly leaned toward evening. Shadows grew longer across the street, and the sound of traffic softened. Inside the restaurant, the mood remained steady and quiet. The man pushed his plate away once he was finished. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook, worn at the edges. He opened it and stared at a blank page for a long time. His pen hovered, then touched the paper, then stopped. He closed the notebook without writing anything and placed it back into his pocket. Across the room, the young waitress continued working. She moved between tables, refilling glasses and collecting empty plates. Yet her attention kept drifting back to the piano. The melody still echoed in her mind. She tried to hum it under her breath but stopped, realizing it was more than just notes. Felt like a message. She had grown up hearing similar sounds. Not exactly the same, but close enough to feel familiar. The pacing, the silence between the notes, the way the music did not rush to impress, but waited patiently to be felt. It reminded her of evenings from her past, of quiet rooms and soft lamps, of music played not for crowds, but for the soul. She glanced at the man's table. He sat alone, staring out the window now, watching people pass by who had no idea who he was or where he had come from. There was no pride in his posture, no sense of importance, only calm, mixed with something heavier. The waitress felt a strange pull. She wanted to ask him about the music, but she hesitated. Approaching a customer without reason could feel awkward. She told herself she was imagining things. Still, the feeling did not leave. At another table, a group of customers began talking louder. One of them joked about the piano performance, saying it sounded like the keys were arguing with each other. Laughter followed. It was not cruel laughter, but careless. The kind that comes from not understanding. The man heard it. He did not turn around. He did not react. But his jaw tightened slightly. Only for a moment. Then it relaxed again. He had learned long ago that not every message is received, and not every truth is welcomed. He stood up to leave. The staff noticed and prepared the bill. As he waited near the counter, he looked once more at the piano. There was no sadness in his eyes now, only reflection. He had said what he needed to say even if no one listened. The waitress saw him standing there and felt her chance slipping away. Her heart beat faster than usual. She wiped her hands on her apron and took a small step forward. Then another. She stopped. What would she say? Before she could decide, another customer stepped between them, asking for help with the bill. The moment passed. The man paid quietly, thanked the staff and turned toward the door. Just before he reached it, he paused. He turned slightly, looking back at the piano one last time. His hand lifted, almost as if he wanted to touch it again, but he stopped himself. Some things are meant to be shared once. The waitress watched him closely now. The feeling in her chest grew stronger. She realized that if she stayed silent, she would regret it. She called out softly. The man turned. Their eyes met. For a brief second, the noise of the restaurant faded. The waitress felt nervous, but she spoke anyway. She did not talk about rules or noise. She did not complain. She simply said that the music sounded meaningful, that it felt like a story. The man's expression changed. Surprise crossed his face, followed by something deeper. Relief, perhaps, or recognition. He did not answer right away. He studied her carefully, as if trying to understand whether she truly meant it. She held his gaze, unsure if she had said too much. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm, with a gentle accent. He asked her what she thought the music was saying. The waitress swallowed and answered honestly. She said it sounded like a journey, like someone remembering where they started and everything they lost and gained along the way. The man's eyes softened. Around them, no one noticed what was happening. To the others, it was just a customer and a waitress exchanging a few words. But between them, something important had begun. For the first time that day, the man smiled. Not a wide smile, not a proud one, just a small, quiet smile that carried years of unspoken feeling. He nodded slowly, and in that moment, the piano was no longer misunderstood. The man did not leave right away. After the short exchange, he stepped aside, as if giving the moment space to breathe. The waitress felt her hands tremble slightly, so she placed them behind her back. She had not planned to speak to him. The words had come out on their own. For a few seconds, neither of them said anything. The restaurant noise slowly returned to normal. Someone asked for more water. A chair moved. Life continued around them, unaware that something quiet but important was unfolding. The man finally spoke again. He asked how she knew the music felt like a journey. His tone was not testing her. It was curious, open. She took a breath and answered honestly. She said she had heard music like that before, not in big halls or on recordings, but in small rooms where people played for themselves. Music that carried memories instead of performance. Music that paused when emotions became heavy. The man listened closely. His head tilted slightly, and his eyes never left her face. It had been a long time since someone spoke to him this way about music, without trying to impress or gain something. She added that the silence between the notes mattered just as much as the notes themselves. That the pauses felt intentional, like someone remembering before speaking again. At that, the man let out a soft breath, almost a laugh, though no sound came with it. He nodded slowly. She had noticed something very few ever did. He asked her if she spoke Japanese. She shook her head and said no, not fluently. But she explained that she had studied some of the culture when she was younger. She had worked in places where visitors came from many countries. Over time, she had learned to listen differently, not just to words but to feeling. The man looked at the piano again. He said the piece he played did not have a name. It was something he had carried for years, changing little by little as his life changed. He told her that when he was younger, he used to play it late at night, when no one else was awake. It was the only time he felt honest with himself. She listened without interrupting. He explained that as his business grew, his life became louder. Meetings, expectations, constant movement. Yet inside he often felt quiet and unseen. The piano became a place where he could return to who he was before success shaped him. The waitress felt a tightness in her chest. Not pity but understanding. She had seen people chase things they thought would fill them, only to feel more alone when they arrived. She said softly that sometimes the most important language is the one no one teaches. The man looked at her again, surprised by her words. He asked what she meant. She said that everyone speaks, but few are heard. And even fewer are understood. Music, she believed, was one of the last honest languages left. But only if someone was willing to listen. He smiled again, this time a little longer. They stood there talking while minutes passed unnoticed. The staff did not interrupt. The customers did not pay attention. It was as if the two of them existed in a small space outside of time. Eventually, the man asked if she would like to hear the story behind the music. She nodded. He spoke quietly, choosing his words carefully. He told her about leaving home at a young age, about taking risks that scared him, about nights spent doubting himself while the world expected confidence. He talked about losing people along the way, not through death, but through distance, through choices that pulled lives in different directions. The piano piece, he said, held all of that. The beginning was hope. The middle was struggle. The ending was acceptance. Not happiness, not sadness. Just acceptance of what life had become. The waitress felt tears gather in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She did not want to turn his story into something dramatic. It was real, and real stories did not need exaggeration. She thanked him for trusting her with it. He replied that trust came easily when someone listened without judgment. A silence followed, comfortable this time. Then something unexpected happened. One of the customers nearby had been quietly listening. Not to the music, but to their conversation. He cleared his throat and asked, politely, what the song meant. There was no mockery in his voice now, only curiosity. The waitress looked at the man, unsure how he would react. He considered the question, then answered simply. He said it was a story about becoming someone the world recognizes, while trying not to forget who you were before. The customer nodded slowly, as if the words settled somewhere deep. Another person leaned in slightly, then another. No one made a scene. No one spoke loudly, but the atmosphere shifted. The music from earlier no longer felt strange, felt unfinished. The man glanced at the piano once more. He asked the waitress if she would mind if he played again. She smiled and said she would be honored. He returned to the piano, this time not with uncertainty, but with calm purpose. His fingers touched the keys, and the room seemed to lean in. The melody began again, familiar but different, softer in some places, stronger in others. Felt like the same story told with clearer words. People listened now. They did not all understand it fully, but they felt something. A few closed their eyes. Someone stopped eating. The careless laughter from before was gone. The waitress stood nearby, listening closely. Now that she knew the story, the music felt even deeper. Each note carried weight but also peace. When the final sound faded, the silence that followed was not awkward. It was respectful. No one clapped loudly. A few people nodded. One person whispered thank you, though it was unclear to whom. The man stood up and stepped back. He looked at the waitress and gave a small bow of his head. A gesture of gratitude, not pride. She returned it instinctively. In that moment, the piano was no longer just an old instrument in a forgotten corner. It had become a bridge. Between cultures. Between lives. Between being seen and being understood. And the story was far from over. After the second performance ended, the room stayed quiet longer than usual. It was not the kind of silence that made people uncomfortable. Felt thoughtful, almost gentle. Some customers looked at the piano as if seeing it for the first time. Others stared at their hands, lost in their own memories. The man stepped away from the piano and returned to the counter. He did not look proud. He did not wait for praise. His face showed calm, as if he had finally placed something heavy down. The waitress watched him closely. She felt different now, as though the room itself had shifted. What had started as a normal workday had turned into something she would remember for a long time. She noticed her breathing slow, her shoulders relax. She felt present. A few customers quietly approached the counter as well. One asked where the piano piece came from. Another said they had never heard anything like it before. No one spoke loudly. No one joked anymore. The careless mood from earlier was gone. The man answered politely, keeping his words simple. He said the music came from life, from years of learning and unlearning. He did not mention success or money. He spoke as if those things were not the point. Someone asked if he played professionally. He smiled softly and said no. He said the piano had never been his job. It was something that helped him stay human when everything else tried to turn him into a machine. That answer stayed with the waitress. As people returned to their tables, the restaurant slowly found its rhythm again. But it was changed. Conversations were quieter. Movements were slower. It was as if everyone wanted to hold on to the feeling just a little longer. The man sat down again, this time near the window. The light outside had faded into evening. Streetlights glowed softly, and reflections danced on the glass. He looked tired, but peaceful. The waitress brought him a cup of tea without being asked. She placed it gently on the table. Their eyes met and she smiled. He thanked her with a nod. He took a sip and stared out the window. After a moment he spoke quietly. He said that most of his life had been spent proving himself. Proving his worth. Proving his ideas. Proving his strength. But very little time had been spent being understood. She listened. He said that earlier in his life, he believed understanding would come automatically once he achieved enough. Once people admired him. Once his name meant something. But admiration, he learned, was not the same as connection. The waitress leaned against the chair across from him, careful not to cross any boundaries. She said that many people confuse being seen with being known. One brings attention, the other brings peace. He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. He told her that there were rooms much larger than this one where he had played the piano. Rooms filled with important people. Rooms where applause came quickly. But those rooms always felt colder than this small restaurant. She understood what he meant. The piano here was old. The room was simple. The people were ordinary. And yet, something honest had happened. A short silence passed. Then the man reached into his pocket and pulled out his notebook again. This time he opened it. He flipped through pages filled with short lines, half-written thoughts, and small sketches. He stopped at a blank page. He began to write. The waitress did not ask what he was writing. She sensed it was private. But she noticed his hand moved steadily, without hesitation this time. When he finished, he closed the notebook and looked relieved. He said that sometimes, being understood by one person is enough to unlock years of silence. She smiled and said she felt honored to be that person today. Nearby, a couple quietly discussed the music. One of them said it reminded them of their parents. The other said it made them think about choices they never made. The piano had reached them in different ways, even without words. The man stood up once more. This time it felt like a goodbye. He walked toward the piano and placed his hand on it gently. He did not play. He simply rested his palm there, as if thanking it. Then he turned back to the waitress. He asked her a simple question. He asked if she believed moments like this could change people. She thought carefully before answering. She said she believed moments did not change people all at once. But they planted something. The thought, the feeling, a pause. And sometimes that was enough. He smiled, satisfied with her answer. Before leaving, he spoke to the manager quietly. No one heard what was said. The exchange was short and respectful. The manager looked surprised, then grateful. The man returned to the door. As he stepped outside, he stopped and looked back one last time. His eyes met the waitress's again. He bowed his head slightly deeper this time, not as a habit but as a sign of respect. She returned the gesture. The door closed behind him. For a moment, the restaurant felt empty, even though it was not. Something important had passed through it and moved on. The waitress returned to her duties, but her movements were slower now. Thoughtful. She felt changed, not dramatically, but quietly, as if a window inside her had opened. Later that evening, the manager gathered the staff and shared the news. The man had offered to help restore the piano. Not replace it. Restore it. Keep its age. Keep its story. The staff stood in silence, surprised. The waitress felt her throat tighten. The piano was not just an object anymore. It was a witness. As the night ended and the last customer left, the waitress walked over to the piano. She pressed a single key. The sound was soft, imperfect, and real. She smiled. Some stories do not end loudly. They stay. And this one was still unfolding. Days passed after the man left, but the feeling he brought with him did not fade. The restaurant returned to its normal pace, yet something subtle had changed. People spoke a little softer near the piano. Children no longer banged on the keys without thought. Even those who had not been there that day seemed to sense that the corner held meaning. The waitress noticed it first. She found herself listening more carefully to people, to pauses in conversation, to small changes in tone. It was as if the music had tuned her ears in a new way. She still served food and cleared tables, but she did it with more awareness, more presence. One evening, a technician arrived to look at the piano. He moved carefully, respecting its age. He cleaned the keys, adjusted the pedals, and repaired what time had worn down. He did not replace the scratches. He did not polish away its history. When he finished, the piano sounded clearer, but it still felt like itself. The manager gathered the staff and explained that the restoration had already been paid for. No name was attached. No message was left. Just a simple request to keep the piano available to anyone who wished to play it. The waitress felt a quiet warmth in her chest. Weeks went by. Sometimes a customer would sit at the piano and play a few notes. Nothing impressive. Nothing perfect. But people listened now. They allowed the sound to exist without judgment. The restaurant became a place where music did not interrupt life, but lived alongside it. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was addressed to the restaurant, not to any person in particular. The envelope was plain. Inside was a short note written neatly. The manager read it aloud to the staff. The note said that the man had returned home, that he had carried the moment with him, that he had played the piano again, but differently this time. Lighter, slower. It said that being understood once had reminded him that success meant little without connection. And it thanked the restaurant for giving him a place to be heard. The waitress listened quietly. She felt no need to keep the moment for herself. Some things are meant to be shared, even if only through silence. That evening, after closing, she sat at the piano alone. She did not know how to play well. Her fingers hesitated. She pressed a few keys and let the sound fill the empty room. It was uneven and simple but honest. She remembered what the man had said about acceptance, about letting things be what they are. She played slowly, listening more than performing. Outside, the streetlights glowed softly. Inside, the piano spoke in its own quiet way. Far away, the man sat in a room overlooking a city that never slept. His life had returned to its fast rhythm. Meetings, decisions, responsibility. But something inside him had shifted. He found himself pausing more often, listening longer, speaking less. One night, after a long day, he opened his notebook. He read the page he had written in the restaurant. The words were simple but clear. They reminded him that being human was not a weakness. It was a responsibility. He closed the notebook and moved to his piano. He played the same piece again. This time he imagined the small restaurant, the worn keys, the quiet room, the waitress standing nearby, listening without needing to fix anything. The music flowed gently. It no longer carried only the weight of his past. Carried gratitude. Back at the restaurant, life continued. New customers arrived who had never heard the story. Old customers returned and smiled when they passed the piano. No sign explained its importance. No plaque told what had happened. The meaning lived only in memory and feeling. The waitress eventually moved on from the job. Not because she was unhappy, but because she felt ready for something new. On her last day, she touched the piano one final time. She thanked it silently. She carried the lesson with her wherever she went. That listening can change everything. That understanding does not always come from shared language, but shared attention. That sometimes, One small moment is enough to soften a lifetime. Years later, someone would still sit at that piano and feel something they could not explain. They would not know why. They would not need to, because the music had already done its work. And the story, though quiet, had reached exactly where it needed to go.